Hey guys, this is Kevin Calhoun. I'm here with Jack Frisby, and we just want to record a real quick message. Basically, the bottom line is we believe that if you're doing business as usual, you're going to lose in these times. We really believe that COVID's the enemy, and that what we really want to strive and kind of flush out today is, if you're thinking outside the box, there's a great opportunity for you to thrive. And I think Jack has been working in regards to how to think outside the box for a number of years, but specifically in regards to how to leverage LinkedIn, during this time that we're all kind of stuck at home and have the free time to be able to look through different prospects. But I just want to initiate a conversation with Jack. Jack, if you and I have been friends for a really long time, and why don't you just tell the folks a little bit about your background and what you're doing these days and how you think you might be able to help?
Yeah, so I've been in sales management, sales leadership for about 25 years. And for the last 15 years, I've owned a company called Optimized Selling Solutions, where I've mostly worked with small businesses as a fractional or outsourced sales manager. And so worked with sales teams. And one of the things I've seen over those years is that typically when you look at the bottleneck in the sales process, it's almost always, like 90% of the time, it's the front end of the sales process. In other words, people aren't getting enough conversations started with viable prospects. So
Generating those leads.
Yeah, so that's tended to be the area that I've focused on with companies, is just helping them figure out, like, how do we get more conversations started with those viable prospects.
Cool. Hey, before we jumped on the phone, you and I were talking about like three different areas. I know that we've had a lot of conversations about how you leverage LinkedIn, and you kind of did a great job of laying out three different areas that you think are a good strategy for folks. Can you share what those are?
Yeah. So I think the main thing is that, it's really, I would say, it's not just about LinkedIn. It's really about introductions.
Okay.
Introductions are the best way to get a conversation started with a viable prospect, bar none. And so it's really more about the introductions, I would say, than even it is about LinkedIn. LinkedIn is the tool that we do use. But so because it's so important to think in terms of introductions, then the crux of everything that we do is really around what we call advocates. And an advocate is basically somebody who's just, I call it, fishing in the same pond. So they're just somebody who's serving the same customer base that you are. And if you can identify a half a dozen or so of these advocates, then, these are people that they're going to have a disproportionate number of people that you would like to get introduced to that they are already connected with on LinkedIn. And vice versa, you're going to have a disproportionate number of people that they would like to get connected with or introduced to. Again, because you're both kind of fishing in the same pond, so you're dealing with the same people. So the primary strategy that we built about 5 years ago around this is the idea that if I have a few of these advocates, let's say a half a dozen or so of them, then if I meet with each one of those advocates once a quarter, that's kind of the cadence that we recommend. And the purpose of that meeting is really to just sit down with that advocate and to do a little homework ahead of time and sit down with that person and say, okay, here are 15 or 20 people that I did a search on your LinkedIn connections by title, by size of company, by industry, by geography, whatever the criteria are that I'm using. I did this search on your connections, and I found these 15 or 20 people that look interesting to me, that look like they might be people that would be ideal prospects for me that I'd like to get introduced to. And then ideally, then your advocate has done the same thing. So you come to that meeting, each of you with maybe 15 or 20 people on that list. The idea being that they're probably not going to know all of those people.
Right.
And so my goal is, in one of those conversations, is if we can each introduce the other person to maybe 8 or 10 people, then that's a great use of my time. And if I do that every quarter with that person, I'm not necessarily going to, the well's not going to run dry anytime soon, because these are people that typically have 500 plus connections on LinkedIn. They may have 100 people in their connections that I would actually like to get introduced to that really kind of fit the bill for my ideal prospect. And so what we recommend is you have that conversation with that advocate vet the list, make sure that both of you are comfortable with the 8 or 10 people that the other person is going to introduce you to. And then you just send those email introductions out. And then obviously you have to work at, getting those appointments set. But what we found in that is that about 2/3 of those introductions will convert to a face-to-face meeting, which is just unbelievable.
Wow, that's huge.
And even being
honestly, I've been doing this for a long time, and there's nothing else that you can do to get that kind of volume of introductions and conversations.
Right. And even if you're conservative and say half of them convert, well, if I get 8 to 10 introductions each time, I'm investing an hour and a half of my time meeting with my friend, my advocate, right? Because they become your friend over the course of time. It's an enjoyable conversation. And the result of that is I get 4 or 5 face-to-face meetings out of that. It's like the most effective use of my time possible. So that's kind of the primary strategy that we promote. We have some virtual assistants. We call them executive assistants who provide that service to our clients. The second strategy really is sort of the inverse of that, or it's really kind of reverse engineering that. And that is where, because when we first started doing this, I had clients that said, "Hey, that's great. I love that. But what if I have a list of people that
they've got a targeted list of folks?
They've already got a target list, right? Yeah. Right. And so we said, well, let us figure that out. And so basically what we figured out was that if you've got this list, if you're a second degree connection with the people on that list, let's say you have a list of companies and then your title is, CEO, president, or owner. So, you've got a list of companies, you find out who the president is. Again, you can do that through LinkedIn. And then you say, okay, I'm a second degree connection. I've got 100 people on this list or 100 companies on this list. And I'm a second degree connection with 50% of those or 50 of those, Well, if you're a second degree connection to that person, then that means that you have at least one person who's connected to both of you. And many times it's multiple people. And
there's so many times I'll go through and say, oh, so-and-so, they give you at least 3 options and it's usually about 10 deep.
Exactly. And sometimes it's crazy. Like sometimes I'll be like, I have 150 people that we're both connected to.
It's like, how do we not know each other? We've got to be related, right?
And sometimes I'll just I'll reach right out to that person. I'm like, dude, you and I have like 150 people that we're both connected. How do we not know each other? We should correct that. We should grab a cup of coffee sometime. I don't think it's ever failed. Like, people they're like, yeah, how do we not know each other? But let's assume that maybe there's just 1 or 2 or whatever, people that are connected to both of us. Then the strategy basically is to go to that person or persons and say, hey, I noticed that you're connected to Jim Smith at XYZ Corporation. I'd really like to get introduced to that guy. Do you know him well enough to make that introduction? And they either say yes or no. In fact, what we found that I mentioned to you earlier that's really fascinating to me is even when they don't know that person very well or at all, frankly, oftentimes what we see is that if they'll go ahead and make that introduction anyway, the person will still take the meeting with you. I mean,
you're not basically approving this individual. You're just simply saying, hey, we think, here's an introduction. You need to be a big boy and do whatever you're going to do.
And that's a key. We make a big distinction between an introduction and a referral.
Right.
And I sort of jokingly, sort of not, tell people, don't ever ask for another referral the rest of your life. Ask for introductions instead. Because it's easier to ask for an introduction, and it's easier for somebody to give you an introduction because they're not necessarily endorsing either party. Now, obviously, there's sort of an implied endorsement in that. But so then what happens is that, that person, if they agree to make the introduction for me, for whoever it is, then what we do is we say to them, hey, if you're willing to make this introduction, I'll write a draft email for you so that you don't have to do that. And what that does is 2 things. One is it really kind of compels them to send it out because I've done the work for them. But the second thing is that it allows me to frame the message because we're very careful about how we frame that message. We want the message to be just a casual introduction. We don't want to be salesy in it. It's just, hey, you are two good guys. I think you guys ought to meet each other and just know each other. I think you'll both be glad to know the other person. That's kind of the.
Plus, I think that's probably one of the hesitations when you do something like that. The other person across the table is like, I don't know your business that well. But if you're writing the emails for them, you're like, look, just all you need to do is hit send and it's done.
That's it. Yeah, if they want to add, a personal word or some edit or whatever, that's fine. And, so we'll tell them, hey, feel free to edit this however you want to. Otherwise, just send it out and we're good to go. So that's really the second strategy. And these are kind of in order of priority. So really, again, because it's all about the introduction, the most effective way to do that is our first strategy, where we're developing deep relationships with these advocates, where we're really leaning into each other. We understand each other's businesses really well over the course of time. And so we're able to make those introductions, and they're powerful, powerful introductions. Again, that's part of the reason why they convert, 50% to 67% to face-to-face meetings. And then the second strategy, it's not quite as much built on that relationship, because it's just kind of seeing who's connected to both parties, but it still works because it is still an introduction. And then our third strategy, I said before, like, let's say you have a list of 100 people and you're a second degree connection to like 50 of those people, but 50 of them you're not. And so you don't have a connection in common. And so our third strategy then is to reach out directly to those people on LinkedIn and to look at their profile in advance. Like, don't automate this. Automating this does not work. But if you look on their profile and you see something there that's genuinely intriguing to you, then mention that in the introduction. Hey, I was looking at your profile. I noticed that you coach girls soccer, and just thought that was kind of cool because I've coached my daughter's soccer team for the last 10 years.
Right.
Your connection rate, your acceptance of that connection request is going to go through the roof if you're able to identify something in their profile and make it more of a personable, kind of a request. Now, the research on that shows that if you just kind of send out blanket requests, you'll get about 25% of those people that will connect.
That will connect with you.
Yeah. So let's say it's 50 people. I still get 12 people that connect with me. And then the research also suggests that, again, if I frame it properly, I'll probably get about 25% of those people to actually jump on a quick call, a get acquainted call, 15-minute Zoom call, whatever. So the reality is that for those 50 people, it didn't really take me very long to draft those connection requests. And I got, say a dozen of them that connected with me. And then if I get 25% of those to actually take a call, so I'm getting, 3 or 4 calls out of this thing as a result of that effort.
Again, like I said, I've been doing this for a long time. I don't know of any other process that can generate 3 or 4 calls on a regular basis. If you're doing this, let's see, even part-time and doing it, once or twice a week, that's a huge volume of individuals.
Absolutely. If I have 50 people, it's probably going to take me, maybe it takes me an hour, maybe it takes me 2 hours, to write those connection requests. And then boom, I'll start watching over the next several days. Sometimes there's a lag, and I'll start getting these people accepting that connection request. And then I just respond back, or my assistant actually does it, responds back and says, hey, Kevin, thanks for connecting with me on LinkedIn. We should probably jump on a 15-minute get acquainted call now that we're connected on LinkedIn, because logically it doesn't make sense for them to connect with you and then not be willing to at least jump on a get acquainted call. Now, everybody understands LinkedIn differently, and some people they think it's like Facebook. I just want a bunch of people that I'm, friends with or followers. But if people understand how LinkedIn works at all, then they're going to just jump. They're going to go, yeah, that makes sense. And frankly, if they're not willing to jump on a call with me, then we'll try, maybe 2 or 3 times to get that call scheduled. And if they're not willing to do that, then we may just go ahead and disconnect with them, because it doesn't really even make sense to be. I'm not interested in just building up a bunch of connections with people that I don't really even know, right?
Yeah.
So that's really the third strategy. And again, like I said, in order of sort of preference or in order of viability. So that's sort of that third strategy. It still works, and like you said, it's still pretty efficient, but it's kind of our last ditch effort, because what you're doing in that third strategy is you're taking the value or the power of the introduction out of the equation. Now you're still leveraging. There's a little bit of social pressure here because we're all on LinkedIn together. And if they've connected with me on LinkedIn, then there's some social pressure to go ahead and jump on a call, but it's more of a cold call feel to it, if you will.
Yeah, I agree. But I mean, still, gosh, if you just think
Better than
about
nothing.
it's better than nothing. But man, if you just think about the probably hour to 2 hours that all of us have been, commuting on a regular basis, and now
Right.
with the fact that we're basically, sequestered at home, if we just turn that hour or 2 hours into this productivity of reaching out to folks on LinkedIn and having introductions made for us, wow, coming out of this thing is going to be huge.
Well, and it's interesting too when I've seen over the years that we've done this, that when I get introduced to somebody, the conversation starts at a different level, right? It starts at more of a colleague to colleague level, as opposed to somewhat of a subordinated level, And so when I get introduced to somebody and the conversation starts at that collegial level, it shortens the sales cycle because I'm starting at a different place. And so, like, again, with us being sequestered here, I've had a couple of different experiences. I won't bore you with the details right now, but just even over the last 2 weeks where I got introduced to somebody, like one guy I got introduced to before all this happened. And then I shot an email to him and I said, hey, we obviously can't meet together. Do you still want to meet? And he goes, actually, I do, because I'm kind of like going out of my mind here and I want to have conversations with people. Yeah. I'm like, okay, cool. And that conversation in the last couple of weeks, we have now had 3 conversations. So like he's requesting subsequent conversations with me, and it's really him asking for the subsequent conversation to talk about buying my service. And I've had just several experiences like that where I think what I've been experiencing is that by using tools like Zoom or others, Microsoft Teams, whatever, that it's a very efficient way of having that conversation with somebody. Sure. And there is something to be said for a video call versus just a phone call, because we can see body language. It just feels more personable when we can see the person on the other end of it.
I can see your very lonely plant behind you.
Yeah, right. my daughter thought I just built these shelves, and she's like, your shelves look so lonely. So she went outside and she like cut some greenery and put it behind me.
That's great. That's great. But, hey,
yeah.
Jack, when I know you need to run, but if somebody basically was interested in getting more introductions versus referrals and wanted to leverage LinkedIn, how would they reach out and find you?
Yeah, they can
contact you?
Yeah, shoot me an email at jack@optimizeselling.com. jack@optimizeselling.com.
Perfect. I appreciate you coming on, because the reality is that, like I said earlier, business as usual, if you're just focused on business as usual, I think you're going to lose.
Absolutely.
And the fact that we I'm going to say an opportunity, honestly, because we don't have that drive time. How do we leverage that drive time? If we can think outside of the box, I think we're going to thrive as we come out of this situation. So I really appreciate you sharing those 3 different strategies. And guys, if you want to leverage your LinkedIn connections and your friends, contact Jack. I've known him for years, and he does an amazing job. So, Jack, appreciate the time, and God bless you. Stay safe.
All right. Thanks.